Hot and cold climate cultures. The population of the world can basically be divided into two parts. There's the hot climate culture, which is relationship-based, and the cold climate culture, which is task-oriented. Now, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but it's just a reality that we must always take into consideration when working with other cultures. This is not only true for nations, but even within nations. For example, the southern part of North America would be considered a hot climate culture, whereas the northern part of the United States or North America would be considered a cold climate culture. Now, of course, this is not 100% true, but overall, it can be stated this way. Now, it is our desire today to give you a few foundational tidbits of information, if learned and applied, will equip us to become better global Christians, resulting in increased fullness of ministry. Now, realize we don't know it all. I most definitely do not come to you today as an expert, but I have most certainly made my share of mistakes. I've lived, of course, here in the United States, being born here. I've lived in a hot climate culture in the Philippines for many years. I've lived in a cold climate culture in Eastern Europe for many years. Now, communication across cultures is not easy for everyone. It requires intentionality in learning and in application. Now, despite our ministry experience, our academic pedigree, or extensive global travel, we never fully comprehend the new culture and continually have so much to learn from its people and society. Now, even right here at home, we live in a world of rapidly increasing cross-cultural connections, which raises the great dangers of misunderstandings, alienations, and conflicts. Now, while this subject is paramount for our missionaries ministering across the globe, the need to work across different cultures is almost a given in society today, and even here at home. Therefore, we want to learn how to love our neighbors in ways that makes sense to them. Now, effective cross-cultural ministries begin with interpersonal relationships that bridge the cultural gulfs that separate people. Now, if we are truly going to reach the world, the lost around us, it is vital that we have understanding as we endeavor to communicate and present the gospel cross-culturally. Now, this is an important task for a church that has been told to make disciples of all nations, all ethne, all cultures. Understanding culture is important because sharing the gospel with people is important. Now, there's non-word messages that have different meanings in different cultures. For example, a handshake. Americans like to greet with a handshake, while the Chinese do not want people touching them. Rather, they bow to greet people. Eye contact. Now, in the U.S., people maintain eye contact while speaking to provide importance. Whereas, if you were in Indonesia, looking directly at people is considered to be very disrespectful. So you have to learn these things to be more effective when you're trying to minister. In addressing people, in many cultures, people are addressed by their first name, whereas in other cultures, it's a trend or a symbol of disrespect to use their first name. Now listen to this. There are more than 3,000 languages in the world. And therefore, there is a chance of miscommunication during international speaking. Now, words may have different meaning in different cultures. For example, In Chinese and Japanese, if you say yes, that means I'm listening. But for Americans and British, if you say yes, that means you're right. There's a book by Sarah Lanier entitled From Foreign to Familiar, and this is an excellent resource in this regard. Much of the information from the remaining part of this lesson comes from her research. So we're going to discuss 7 areas and show the difference between the hot climate and the cold climate cultures. Number 1, that's relationship versus task orientation. In the hot climate cultures, they are completely relationship based. This is important to understand. Communication must create a feel-good atmosphere. Now, though the individuals may be otherwise, society is feeling oriented. Efficiency and time do not take priority over the individual. Hear that again. Efficiency and time do not take priority over the individual. For example, if you come to a board meeting, it's inappropriate to talk business upon first arriving at a business meeting or making a business phone call. That's inappropriate. It's a little different than how we think in a cold climate culture. But when I go to a board meeting in the Philippines, we don't start right off with the agenda. We go around the room, we shake hands. How's the family? How's the children? How are you doing? And when you have 20-some people on the board, it may take a while. Even though the announced starting time was 2 o'clock, you might start at 3 o'clock because when you first arrive, it's not business, it's the individual. This is very important in a hot climate culture. Now, in cold climate cultures, they're task-oriented. Communication must provide accurate information. Now, though individuals may be otherwise, the society is logic-oriented. Efficiency and time are high priorities, and taking them seriously is a statement of respect for the other person. Now, for example, when I come to a board meeting here, we have an agenda, we sit down and we start. Number 1, number 2, go right through the board meeting. You can do the other things on time that's not set aside for the board meeting. The difference in the relationship versus the task-oriented societies. Number 2 is indirect versus direct communication. Indirect, if you can see me going behind, indirect versus direct communication. In the hot climate cultures, they use indirect communication. It's all about being friendly. Every question must be phrased in such a way as not to offend by its directness. For example, somebody took money out of the offering plate. You think you know who it is. So, when you're in the board meeting, you think one of those board members took money out of the offering plate. You do not, in a hot climate culture, you do not, in front of the whole board, say, Brother Jones, did you take money out of the offering plate? Because that is a no-no in their culture. You use a third party for accurate information. If you sense that a direct question will be too harsh or will not get the results that you are seeking, you would have somebody go and talk to Brother Jones about it in private. Or you could rephrase the question. In front of the board, you could say, Brethren, there's a problem, and it seems someone has been taking money out of the offering plate. Could anyone here shed some light on that subject? That way you're not being direct and you're not being accusatory. Now, in the hot climate culture, which is using indirect communication, A yes may be an answer to your question. But if they answer yes, it could just be the first step in beginning a friendly interchange. It does not mean yes the same way that many of us think yes means. Verbal compliance may be required by their culture. Therefore, avoid yes and no questions when you're in that hot climate culture. And by all means, avoid embarrassing people. Now, in the cold climate culture, direct communication is important. Short, direct questions show respect for the person's time as well as professionalism. A yes is a yes and a no is a no. There's no hidden meanings. An honest, direct answer is for information only. It does not reflect on how the person feels about you. Now, you can say what you think nicely, and it would not be taken personally, usually. Number 3, group identity versus individual communication. So we have to think in terms of we and not I. And that can be a major switch for people from individualistic societies. So in the hot climate cultures, they are group-oriented cultures. I belong, therefore I am. It's being a part of the group that gives me identity. So my identity is tied to the group, to the family, or to the tribe. That's how I get my identity. The group protects and provides for me. Now, taking initiative within a group is greatly determined by my role. If I'm the head of the group, yeah, you can take initiative. But if I'm the low man on the totem pole, you don't take the initiative, you support the initiative by the leader. And I do not have to expect to stand alone, because my behavior reflects on the whole group. So if I go to correct someone that's in a hot culture, I say your actions are looking bad for the whole group, not just yourself. Or their actions are looking bad for your family. And that brings it into a whole new level for them because they're a part of that group. And team members expect direction from the leader. Now, the cold climate culture is individually oriented, individualistic oriented. And there's a different concept about this. I'm a self-standing person with my own identity. Every individual should have an opinion and can speak for him or herself. Yeah. And I've heard people say, this is my opinion, and I can say my opinion, you can like it or not. That's an individualistic society. Now, taking initiative within a group is good, and they expect you to take initiative. One must know how to make one's own decisions. My behavior reflects on me and not on the whole group. That's the difference between the hot climate culture and the cold climate culture. Now, can you see why we run into conflicts within our churches and within our ministry? Because we do not have a clear understanding of the cultural background of those that we are ministering or speaking with. We'll go to number 4. And this is the inclusion versus privacy. Now, in the hot climate cultures, it is an inclusive culture. They're group-oriented, and therefore individuals know they are automatically included in conversations, in meals, and in other activities of the group. You're automatically included. If you're in the room, you're included. It's how it is. Now, possessions are to be used freely by all. That's food and tools, etc. As a matter of fact, and this is not a negative, please understand me. It's not a negative. But when I lived in the Philippines, here's the understanding that we got. What's yours is yours, and what's yours is mine if you're not using it. It's a group mentality. Okay? Inclusion. It's rude in their culture to hold a private conversation or make plans that it excludes other people that are present. Yeah. That's rude. Now, in a cold climate culture, which is a privacy-induced culture, people enjoy having time and space to themselves. Yeah. Now, people are expected to ask permission to borrow something or to interrupt a conversation. Oh. Excuse me, could I interject something here? Whereas in an inclusive society, you just go ahead and interject it. You don't ask for permission. Now, each person is considered to be the steward of his or her own possessions and has the responsibility to maintain and protect them. That's in the privacy culture, cold climate. In a community setting, it might be common to label one's food, to label one's tools, to set them apart from the group's common possessions. Yeah. And in the cold climate culture, privacy, it's acceptable to hold private conversations or to make exclusive plans with a few people, not including everyone. Can you start to get a feeling of the difference between the cultures? Now, there are different concepts also. This is number 5 of hospitality. In hot climate cultures, hospitality is the context for relationship. Hospitality always involves food and or drink, and it's usually done in the home. To bring someone into your home is to say, I offer to relate to you personally. Only formal occasions require invitations. The rest is spontaneous. In most hot climate cultures, hospitality automatically means taking in and caring for the traveler. If you're visiting someone's home, they take full responsibility for your needs. You're under their roof, and this means that you should have no needs that they cannot provide. However, it's also considered normal, even expected, for the traveler to offer the host a gift. In most hot climate countries, in fact, in most countries of the world outside of the United States, if someone says, let's get a hamburger, it means I'm inviting you and I'll pay for it. Yeah. So let's talk about this hospitality differences between the two cultures. In the hot climate culture, hospitality is spontaneous and it's often without an advance invitation. Hospitality is the context for relationship, even business relationships. Hospitality usually takes place in the home. The host fully takes care of the needs of the guest, and the guest pays for nothing, but usually a gift is expected. Food and drink are also involved, and travelers are taken in and provided for. Now, in the cold climate culture, hospitality is taken very seriously, and you usually plan in advance for it. It's usually not as spontaneous. The host usually needs advance notice of a visit. Travelers are expected to make their own arrangements other than what is specifically communicated to the host ahead of time. Guests need to expect to pay for their transportation and restaurants if visiting in the United States. If the host plans to pay, he usually tells them in advance he will pay. Hospitality is a special occasion, taking the full attention of the host. There's the difference between hospitality between hot climate cultures and cold climate cultures. Number 6 of the 7 we will discuss. There's the high context versus the low context culture. In the high context settings, who you know is more important than what you know. Yeah. Also, because everything matters, so does how you dress. And when in doubt, dress up. The more formal the society, the greater the distance is between authority figures and their subordinates. So addressing authority with titles, respect, and deference is expected. The casual American or Australian can offend a Korean by addressing him or her by their first name. Their informality is seen as disrespect. These are some things we need to learn. Okay, so in the high context societies, everything matters. Who you are related to matters. Who you know matters. It's better to overdress than to underdress. It's best to watch and see how others respond in a situation in order to apply the proper behavior. Remember to honor the people you're dealing with. If you're too casual, it's insulting to them. Ask a local person who has lived overseas what is important to know. Use good manners. Respect the rules. Give attention to appropriate greetings. Now, in the low context societies, nothing matters, anything goes within reason. Who you know matters, but not nearly as much. It's what you know that is important. And if you're from a high context society and you come to a low context society, do not be offended by the casual atmosphere. Lack of protocol does not mean rejecting, nor is it dishonoring. You see, they don't know what your rules are, so leave your rules at home. Address people by their given names unless other people are using titles. Our final one today that we want to discuss is different concepts of time and planning. Now, the hot climate cultures have the reputation for always being late by the cold climate people. They're always late. But the cold climate people are viewed as being neurotically time-oriented by their hot climate friends. So both have their feelings about it. The cold climate societies have a goal of being efficient, getting the job done, planning the job in advance, whereas hot climate people tend instead to be responders to what life brings rather than trying to plan life. So let's look at these two. Hot climate cultures. They are not as oriented toward the clock as cold climate cultures. They are event-oriented. They are spontaneous and flexible in their approach to life. They respond to what life brings. Now, consider that saving time is not as important as experiencing the moment. They recognize that structure is required in some areas of life, for example, the military. Okay? But they have informal visiting as a part of an event. Now, compare that with the cold climate cultures. Cold climate cultures are time-oriented. They're structured in their approach to life. They enjoy using time efficiently. They try to plan their day, and saving time is of value. expecting the event, the dinner, the arrival of a guest or a meeting, to begin at the time announced. Visiting or informally chatting happens either before or after the event. And I have one final example for you in this regard. 46 years ago this month, my wife and I got married. We were, we planned our wedding. We really did. We wrote our own vows. We wrote the agenda and everything that was going to happen. I remember us sitting down and writing out the plans. We even put timers on it. We'll start to walk the aisle at this time. The vows will be said at this time. We'll walk out at this time. And we wrote our vows, and we had it all scheduled out and planned. And I don't know, this seems strange to me now and crazy, but I remember after the final I do and the wedding march happened and we were walking down the aisle of the church, I looked up at the clock and we were within 2 minutes of the time that we had put on our schedule. Wow, how binding we were. Now compare that to a wedding I went to, I was to be speaking at in the Philippines. They announced 2 o'clock, but it was about 4 hours from where we lived. So we got up that morning. I got my boys ready because they were just young. They were going to be a part of the wedding, got them dressed up in their nice clothes, and we got all dressed. And because of this important event, we wanted to make sure we were there on time. And so I arrived at the church about 4 hours away at about 1:30. And you know what? There was no one there. I was kind of surprised. This was a big event. This was a staff member of our Bible school, and we wanted to make sure everything was proper, but no one was there. I waited and I waited, and I got nervous because I thought maybe I had the wrong day, the wrong address, or whatever. And about 10 minutes to 2, somebody came to the church. And so I asked them, I said, is this the church where the wedding is to take place? They said, oh yeah. I said, well, I looked at my wife, I said, it's supposed to take place at 2 o'clock. They said, oh yeah. I said, okay. They said, just wait. So I waited, and people started filtering in. So I think the wedding started, the service started about 3:20. I was fit to be tied in knots. I said, wow, I can't believe this. But it was a whole different scenario. It was the event that they were enjoying. As a matter of fact, they probably started getting ready for the event at 2 o'clock. It was announced 2 o'clock, but it didn't take place till about 3:20. And I had to get an understanding of the different concepts of time to enjoy the event rather than be hung up on the clock. So these are just some of the things that we have to consider when we're dealing with cross-cultural people and their way that they've been brought up and their understandings. God bless each one of you today.